Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. So please quiet down. Obviously, it's me. It's not Will up here today. Unfortunately, Will got caught in a storm. He's okay, but he wasn't able to make class this evening. That being said, he did send us this lovely photo of a rainbow with an accompanying quote that I would love to share with you all. He says, "We all need to pace ourselves through this wet winter and be grateful for the storms, even when they are disruptive to our fast-paced lives." So obviously that applies to his absence, but can be interpreted in lots of other ways too. Tonight I have the pleasure of introducing our three esteemed speakers on the promises of regenerative agriculture. I'll just take a minute to orient you all with their backgrounds, and then we'll go forth with their discussion for tonight. So first, you'll see Elaine Siegner, who is the director of Terra.do's Climate Farm School located in Sebastopol. Siegner's PhD in the Energy and Resources Group at UC Berkeley illuminated her research in in sustainable urban and rural food systems, climate change education, and farm-to-school programs. Her current work at Climate Farm School works towards educating people of all ages in the intersections of agroecology, climate action, and social justice. Next, we are joined by Elaine, who is the head of operations at Planet Forward, where she helps consumer brands access and improve their climate impact. She launched Moonshot Snacks, the first climate-focused snack brand with a focus on regenerative agriculture. Her work with other companies like California Environmental Associates, Numi Organic Tea, and Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture has informed her time throughout her career and at UC Berkeley's MBA program, shout out, where she focused her studies on sustainable food systems. Finally, Ryan Peterson is dedicated to regenerating ecosystems through food and agriculture. After beginning his career in finance, he decided to change course and study sustainability at UC Berkeley, where he was captivated by the potential of food system transformation. His master's research focused on how policy can be used to promote agroecology in California. He went on to train as a cook at Chez Panisse before helping to launch the Culinary and Food Systems program at the Ecology Center, a regenerative farm and ecological center in San Juan Capistrano, California. He's worked in farms in Maine, Northern and Southern California, and Hawaii, and he spends his time collaborating with farmers and chefs, developing educational events around regenerative agriculture, and reconnecting humans to nature through his cooking. So with that, we will welcome Lainey and Ryan up to spend some time with you all.
Wonderful. Well, it's so great to be here with you all this evening. So wonderful to be back on Berkeley campus on a sunny evening. And yes, I was also very disrupted by these storms that have recently hit California, but I appreciate Will's quote reminding me to put that in a really positive context. And of course, we always need and welcome the water. But yes, it was crazy yesterday up in Sonoma County, where I'm currently living. Lots of downed trees, mudslides, flooded creeks. It was, it felt apocalyptic. So I will be speaking to you all a little bit about this sort of big, broad term, regenerative agriculture, that is very popular these days. We're going to talk about what that means, what it doesn't mean, and why it's important. And then Elaine will talk more about challenges and obstacles to applying this sense of a regenerative agriculture future across the food system. So before I talk a little bit more about the definitions, the proliferating definitions of regenerative agriculture, I'll just introduce myself a little more thoroughly. I don't know why there's no picture coming up here. One more click. Yeah? You can just imagine my face in that yellow square. So I am the director of the Climate Farm School program at Terra.do, and how I kind of found my way into this role, it's very much rooted here on this campus. I was in grad school from 2014 to 2019 in the Energy and Resources group, and I felt like at that time there were just not enough classes on Berkeley campus about food systems and climate change. And so I started up a reading group with some other, mostly ESPM and some public health students on climate change and agriculture. We assigned ourselves a bunch of readings, articles, both from academic journals and kind of even like news and media articles. We invited then new faculty member Tim Bowles to join our reading group, and he came every single week and chatted with us about climate change and agriculture. And then by the end of my experience at Berkeley, the Berkeley Food Institute had launched the certificate program in food systems for graduate students and undergrads, and I was really excited to participate in that and take the Transforming the Food Systems class with Elaine, and just be a part of, piecing together experiences on campus that led me to have this certificate, this graduate certificate in food systems. And I think the journey on Berkeley campus to bring together all the various departments and disciplines to have integrated conversations around food and agriculture is just so wonderful and so important and so needed. And I wanted to extend that beyond the university in my next steps when I was finishing my PhD. So I was like, how to do that? It's, December 2019. I was launching myself into the job search process and sort of struggling in the academic faculty job offerings. And then, of course, in March 2020, the pandemic hit, and all of my aspiring job opportunities that were in person dried up, and I was sort of cast astray or adrift for 2 months. And just was kind of frantically applying to everything I could find. I was doing childcare for my niece, and then was fortunate to receive an email from an alumni from the Energy and Resources group, Kamal Kapadia, who was in the process of founding Terra.do, looking for climate change instructors. So I applied, I got the job. The main lesson learned is, be really nice to people in your department and join all the listservs that are available to you. Because this job was only advertised to people in my academic program at that time. And have been working at Terra.do ever since May of 2020. And it's a really wonderful climate school and community for adult professionals. It's also part-time climate support group, part-time climate founders club, lots of cool things happening with a global audience of wonderful individuals who are really focused on taking climate action in their various professional backgrounds and lines of work. And I, this whole time have been so focused on food systems. I was like, cool, you work in tech, or you work on, heat pumps, and you're working in carbon capture and sequestration for like an oil and gas plant. Like those are all potentially important climate solutions, but I want to talk to my food people. So after being at Terra for a little over, maybe just about a year, I was able to convince them to take on a new course and learning opportunity called the Climate Farm School that involves some online education, but also some in-person on the farm time that I feel like is so important to learning about what is the true expression and possibility of regenerative agriculture. Launched the Climate Farm School program in 2021, and I think that story is hopefully going to be illustrated by some pictures. Maybe the pictures are not coming up. I'm not sure why. They were showing up in the little example of, Oh, yeah. Oh, no, pictures. Oh, okay, amazing. Great troubleshooting on the fly. So the Climate Farm School program has been up and running now for a little over a year, and we've expanded the network of amazing and innovative farms that we're working with. We've had a few Berkeley grad and undergrad students apply to take the course, so I encourage any of you interested in on-farm learning to check it out. We have lots of scholarships available. And we're running the course in California, in Italy, on the East Coast, and yeah, California, East Coast, Italy, and Spain as of now. Looking to expand our network of amazing host farms to work with. Maybe we'll launch in Japan one of these days. But yeah, each of our courses involves a lot of time working on the farms in the morning alongside the host farmers, and then also some time engaging with local food system experts, soil scientists, to really do some soil health observations on the farm and understand these key concepts of like what constitutes a healthy soil and what does that mean from a climate change mitigation and adaptation perspective. Okay, and so one of the central conversations that we have every single time we go through the course is basically what is regenerative agriculture. And I often start with asking people to write down their own definition, because basically that's where we're at. Like if you have a definition and you have a definition and you have one, they are all good definitions, and there is no universally structured, centralized definition of regenerative agriculture like there is for example, organic, or there's no legally defined term. People are working to change that. We can talk a little bit more maybe after the break about certifications like the regenerative organic certification, that is trying to bring a little bit more structure to this big term. It seems to me a little bit like the term sustainable development was maybe a few decades ago. Like everyone wanted to be considering themselves sustainable development, but then over time those terms have developed like specific meanings or use cases and applications. But we're still in the early days of regenerative agriculture, and it can mean anything basically from implementing one or two better practices on your farm from a soil health perspective to basically a full transformation of the food system, depending on who you're talking to. So I have two definitions up here that I found just recently from like my latest data search on this term. And the one on the left from the the one on the left has this kind of more focused on soil health type of definition, that it's restoring degraded soils, it's building up soil organic matter, and focusing very much on this like soil science, soil biodiversity side of things. And the practices that you put in place on the farm are the ones that have the potential to move your farm more towards thriving soil health, which is the foundation of overall ecosystem health. The definition on the right from the Regen 1 Coalition includes this element of promoting equity and public health. And so other definers of this term that are trying to make it more expansive are maybe pushing towards like, this is going to change the way we grow food. There's like regenerative agriculture, and then in the same breath, regenerative food systems and regenerative economies and regenerative communities. And it's just kind of this become a bigger term and a bigger meaning for people. But at the same time that it's not really formally defined, it could be prone to greenwashing or co-optation by sort of the big food, big ag companies that are mainly dictating the way the food system functions today and the way food is produced on farmland. So that's why it's like, some people think it's like the answer to all of our problems, and other people are like, let's not even use this word. It's being greenwashed by big food companies. So what should we use instead? A lot of like the comparison between regenerative agriculture and agroecology, which is a way more universally defined and sort of accepted term, it just makes me think, like, I don't know, I like the big, bold vision of regenerative agriculture. I think it is exciting to think of a food system that functions that way. But if we're, sitting around here in like scholarly or academic circles and people are saying, no, we have to use agroecology because it's been defined and it's published in the literature, I'm also okay with that in the right circumstances. So yes, this is a term that has a more kind of grounded and official definition, and it incorporates both the ecological side of growing food and kind of the science of sustainable farming with the practices on the ground and the movement that is required to make that more common. So it really just acknowledges like we can't, get to a place of agroecology or regenerative ag in the fullest sense of that term unless we have political and economic change, because right now those forces are perpetuating the chemical intensive industrial form of agriculture and not an agriculture that is rooted in natural history, native ecology, and thriving, healthy soils. Like we basically can't do that on more farmland without political economic change, as we probably heard last week when you learned more about the Farm Bill, which is really Ryan's area of expertise. So if we want to think about defining regenerative agriculture and what are the sort of key tenets, key pieces, it really, really closely mirrors the soil health principles. So I just wanted to put those up here. I try to memorize them so I can rattle them off at any climate farm school, but you don't have to. You can have this beautiful list of, so keeping the soil covered, also known as soil armor, minimizing disturbance of the soil and external inputs, and that disturbance can be chemical, like fertilizer application, or physical disturbance, such as tillage, maximizing biodiversity. Often we say that biodiversity above ground is mirrored even more so by biodiversity below ground. So you just get widely proliferating soil microbiomes the more diversity you have coming above the ground. And integrating animals, including pollinators. Animals can really be, I think, defined way more broadly. You don't have to be a mixed vegetable and livestock farming operation to be integrating animals and building soil health. You could bring in chicken manure from a local chicken farmer and put that on your land. You could have, bird boxes to welcome predatory birds onto your vineyard and, help with the rodent problems, or a variety of ways you could be bringing non-plant species onto your farm and welcoming their manure, their parts of a healthy, functioning farm ecosystem. So these principles are essentially the same as anyone that puts out 5 or 6 principles of regenerative agriculture. So yeah, I think I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Ryan to share more on why regenerative agriculture matters.
Thank you, Elaine.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Elaine. Thank you to the instructors. It's really nice to be here, and thanks to Will, wherever you are.
Oh, your audio? You need to turn on the, I should turn off mine.
There we go. Good. Okay. Yeah, thank you to Will, who unfortunately it's a bummer to not see him tonight. But I was on the graduate instruction team for this class 6 years ago, and it had a huge impact on me. So it's pretty cool to be back here again, talking about my journey and talking about the thing that inspired me, which is regenerative agriculture, or whatever you want to call it. Will asked me to talk tonight about both my journey, why regenerative agriculture is so important, and those two things for me are pretty inseparable. I mean, it is my discovery of regenerative agriculture that sort of led me to where I am today. I came to Berkeley back in 2016. I was 26 years old, and I had started a career in finance, a pretty different path. And I was just really concerned about the problems that I thought were facing society and the planet. And I thought that I sort of had a front row seat to those in the position I was in on Wall Street. I felt like I was seeing very close hand some of the mindsets that were leading to a lot of these issues around environmental destruction, climate change, inequity, social isolation, an epidemic of chronic diseases. And so I wanted to do something different, but I didn't know what that was, and I didn't really know how I could help. I was also not quite ready to move on from chasing achievement at that point, so I figured I would go to grad school, and I ended up at Berkeley as sort of a cover while I figured out what to do next. But while I was here, I was in the Master of Development Practice program, which was in the College of Natural Resources at that time, and I'm so grateful to that program because it was through that I had a number of experiences that introduced me to food systems, which I just became totally obsessed with, because it seemed like food systems were at the center of all of those issues that I was concerned about. If not the cause, then at least a primary example of those. And so through a few different experiences, Will's food entrepreneurship class, which I think he still has a version of, through being a GSR for this course, a talk by Miguel Altieri, who might still be hanging around Berkeley, about agroecology, and also a Patagonia case study competition, which that year, by chance, was just about regenerative agriculture. I discovered two really kind of life-changing things for me. One, our food system is totally insane. If you think of the worst possible ways that we could grow food, distribute it, and consume it, that is pretty much what we do by and large, especially in this country. But the second thing is that there is absolutely another way to do it. And that way to do it is pretty beautiful and extremely hopeful. And it also is kind of the way that I decided I wanted to live my life. So here I basically took every class that I could that would give me some perspective on the food system, which I think, thanks to Elaine, the class that she referred to, which was set up by Chris Madsen at the time. I don't know if she's still teaching it. But it was a little bit harder. You sort of had to go out around campus and be a bit scrappy. And now it's really cool to see all the students who have put together courses and the teachers who have put together courses. And now I think there's really an amazing food systems program happening here. So it's pretty hard in 15 minutes to summarize the problems with conventional agriculture. And I think you've got a whole semester to do that, and you'll have a lot of other speakers. But just very quickly, these are the things that I see as being the major problems. Environmental degradation and resource depletion. The reliance on fossil fuels and fertilizers leads to tons of greenhouse gas emissions. We also oversimplify landscapes, and we destroy life. And life is anywhere between 40 and 60% carbon. So when you're destroying life above or below ground, like Lainey said, you are releasing carbon into the atmosphere. And then agrochemicals are also creating biodiversity loss. We're also interrupting migration pathways for animals. So it's hugely destructive. Detrimental to public health, agrochemicals also cause cancer, especially for farm workers. We grow a really simplified diet of foods, and they're not super nutritionally dense, so it leads to chronic diseases. And it makes us extremely vulnerable to disasters. So we're seeing in California now this incredible rainfall, which should be good for the state, but because of the way we set up our system, we can't absorb the majority of this rain. Monocultures are also super vulnerable to pests and diseases, which then makes us more reliant on agrochemicals. And it makes farmers vulnerable to economic shock. If you only grow one crop and you lose that crop, you have nothing else to sell. And I put at the bottom here, as with most things, and I'm sure you've heard about this, and we'll hear about this more, all of these problems disproportionately impact the least powerful among us. Some people can continue to run until it's sort of everywhere, but those people in the most vulnerable situations can't. This graphic to me, too, for somebody who was initially primarily interested in ecosystem restoration, and now I'm kind of interested in all of it, is really telling. The amount of land that agriculture accounts for is basically equivalent to the entire Western Hemisphere and China and most of Southeast Asia. So if you want to restore ecosystems and ecosystem function, which we have to do, and we have to do in terms of climate change and a host of other problems, you really can't ignore farmland. It's really nice to have national parks and protected areas, but if there's no corridors between those areas for animals, for pollinators, for birds, then you're not really going to make the impact that you want to. So the other side of it, the part that blew my mind, I learned about as agroecology when I was here, again in Miguel Altieri's class and with Tim Bowles, who also I was super lucky to meet in his first semester here when he was available, and now I think he has people knocking down his door. It basically takes all of those issues, all of those problems, and turns it on its head. Environmental and resource destruction becomes restoration. We can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and off-farm inputs. We can build healthy soils. We can promote more life and biodiversity above ground, which again is the equivalent of carbon. And the ecosystems increase biodiversity off the farm and create wildlife corridors too. Public health, if you take agrochemicals out of the system, you're going to have less chronic disease. You're also going to have less chronic disease when you increase the nutritional diversity and density of our foods. And it actually provides clean air and water as opposed to polluting it, which again, it's just we're doing things exactly in the wrong way, and the right way is incredibly beneficial. It's so simple, but pretty mind-blowing. And then disaster resilience. If we have more genetic diversity amongst our crops, we're less vulnerable to pests and diseases. If we have more diversity of crops, then farmers are economically resilient. And healthy on-farm ecosystems mean resilience to extreme weather events, which we're going to see more and more of, and we are seeing more of, which is why Will is not here tonight. I recently wrote an op-ed for Civil Eats, and this was a month ago, so I will caveat there's been a lot more rain since then. But at that time, we talked to basically all the farmers that we work with in California. And while conventional farmers in the Central Valley were seeing massive destruction, more and more soil erosion, and their crops drowning because their soils are dead, there's no way for air to infiltrate, so water is just pushing off soil and drowning the crops, our farmers were relatively okay. Some of them could be in a bad hydrological situation. There's not too much you can do about that, but for the most part, they were absorbing most of this rainwater, which will make them less reliant on the state's resources throughout the year, helping everybody else. And their crops were okay. There was plenty of air in the soil and plenty of area for that water to infiltrate. So this is a picture of Singing Frogs Farm, which is in Sebastopol, very close to where Elaine lives and where we host a climate farm school. They're a 7-ish acre no-till organic regenerative vegetable farm. You can see on the left a flooding event. This picture with all of that rain gone, but all of the crops still in place, is 24 hours later. Some of that has to do with the slope of the land, but the vast majority of it is just the amount of life that's in their soil. They have about 12% organic matter in their soil versus maybe 1% to 2% on conventional farms. And that means that there's pores and there's life to hold on to that water. And they also had zero runoff. They measured those ponds in the back to see if there's any runoffs from the field, and they had none. So that's just one example of what a regenerative farm looks like. And the question is, I guess, how is it possible that this could be so much better than the way we're doing it? And to me, it's because it recognizes something fundamental that we're getting wrong in many parts of our society, and that is that we are not separate from nature. We're part of nature, and we can be a helpful part of it that encourages these processes, these natural ecosystem processes, and in so doing, grow healthy food and restore ecosystems. Instead of what we do by and large now, which is this very adversarial relationship with nature where we're trying to control it, we're putting chemicals on it, and we're not recognizing that when we have an adversarial relationship with nature, it's like having an adversarial relationship with ourselves. It's like fighting our own bodies. Gary, I'm so glad that you came tonight because I used this picture of you. So I'll just get back quickly to my journey a little bit. Those last two slides summarize what I learned in 2 years here and spent most of my time on. I finished by doing a capstone project on the Farm Bill, which you all heard about last week, which also is just totally crazy and mind-blowing and underpins and codifies all of those issues that we have in the food system. And all I wanted to do was tell everybody that I knew about it. Amazingly, though, their eyes sort of glazed over. Talking about federal policy is not as exciting to some people as it was to me. And that was a struggle for me, especially because I was in class with a lot of people who wanted to make positive social change, but it's just not always that interesting of an area. I assume people in this room might be a little bit different. But what I did find is I always loved to cook. And these things that I had been learning started to show up in the way that I cooked and the food that I served the people who were in study groups with me where I should have been studying but was instead just cooking. And so I kind of realized that when you cook for people, they get curious if the food is half decent. And they start asking questions. And through that process, you can share a lot of information. Because when people ask questions, they listen to the answers as opposed to when you're preaching to them, which is not that exciting for most people. So I got more and more into that, and I got an incredible opportunity, actually, because of this class. I had met Alice Waters, to work at Chez Panisse. I trained to be a cook for a year and a half-ish there, and then I went on to work at a farm and helped build a food system program in Southern California. And then very happily, because of Gary, who's in this picture on the left, I helped at a climate farm school dinner for their pilot course, cook a graduation dinner, and I met Elaine, and I saw what was happening at climate farm school. And that was this incredible culmination for me of all the things that I had done that seemed to be somewhat disconnected over the past 4 years. She was teaching people about food systems on farms and having them live in community, cook, and eat together. And I saw people reconnecting to themselves, to their food, to the land, and I wanted to be a part of it. And I'm extremely grateful to be in that position now. And I think there's a lot of complicated issues around food systems, especially when you talk about the Farm Bill or financing or equity. And those are all important. They're important for you if you want to be change makers in the food system to understand how to act on those levers. At the same time, it is really simple. The principles that Elaine talked about with regenerative agriculture are actually pretty intuitive. They just come from observing nature closely, giving it what it needs, giving it the space that it needs, and sort of helping it along. And I think that is all inherently in us. We've just become pretty disconnected from it over the course of a few generations. And the more we can reconnect with the land around us, with our food, with each other, I think the more we can rebuild that intuition. And then it just follows the way that we want to be growing and eating things. I mean, if you're on a farm, you're looking at something come out of the soil and you know that you're going to consume it, it's pretty stupid to put pesticides on it. It just doesn't really make any sense. So that might be simple. I think everybody in this classroom sort of knows that. But I also think that some of the simple things are sort of the answer. So I'll leave it with that and turn it over to Elaine.
Cool. And I'm here to talk about how it's not so simple. So wonderful. Let's see. I'm the head of operations at Planet Forward and also helped launch Moonshot Snacks. My journey into regenerative agriculture really started here in edible education. Actually, in 2018, one of the speakers was Dan Barber, and he wrote a book called The Third Plate, which kind of talks about this magic that Ryan was referring to. And I read the book, got really into regenerative agriculture, as Ryan and Elaine mentioned, and there was at the time a lot of good like camaraderie and community around folks that were really interested in the topic. So I also did the graduate certificate in food systems where I met Elaine. I worked on a couple of different projects and case studies around not just regenerative, but also sustainable food systems. And one of the things I worked on was a case study with General Mills, which at the time was really getting deep into regenerative agriculture and launching kind of a set of criteria they had, and they announced, I think, $100 million investment in regenerative agriculture initiatives. So I worked with some of their executives to write a case study about how they were doing this. But you know, there's many sides to this story. And one of the things that Ryan and Elaine mentioned was that there's different definitions of regenerative agriculture. And so kind of the definition that General Mills took, and I think is often taken in larger food systems or in larger institutions and kind of the conventional agriculture system as well, is these soil health practices that Elaine put up there. And so I believe the definition General Mills takes is kind of refers to those practices, and a lot of the conversation around it is like, these are the practices that are regenerative agriculture, and in a lot of ways those are really great practices, right? And so we want to encourage that. And then I think the kind of counter forces that they were talking about are, some people conceive of regenerative agriculture as being much more of a systems thinking and systems approach to things, and thinking about them as just being these 5 practices takes out the systems element of it, and can potentially be problematic, but at the same time, all of these soil health principles are all things that we want to encourage in the food system. And so it's a great thing that a lot of these food companies are getting into these soil health principles. And folks who've been talking about agroecology for a long time may feel like it's a watered down version of that systems thinking that is involved in agroecology. And so had this experience at Berkeley, really was thinking a lot about, well, how do we create change and implement more regenerative agriculture in this food system that is so broken, or that we conceive of as being really broken? And I was going to all of these regenerative ag conferences at the time, and at every single conference, I would run into this one woman, Julia Collins, who's the CEO and founder of Planet Forward and Moonshot. And so I started working with her in 2019. And at the time, our goal was to launch a climate-friendly snack that really leveraged the principles of regenerative agriculture. And really, there was no climate-friendly branding on food at that time. Now there, I think, is more and more of it, although it's still a small proportion. And when we set out to do this, we were thinking about kind of a blank slate of, we wanted a packaged food product, and we were thinking about what ingredients made sense to use in it. And we were thinking about what ingredients were available. And when we looked out there was a lot of farmers who were using regenerative principles or soil health principles to grow wheat. And so we actually talked to a lot of farmers that grow wheat with regenerative principles or practices. And the really big challenge in creating a food product from them is that most people that make products that you see in the grocery store are actually several steps removed from the farmer. There's probably a miller or a processor that works with the farm or takes food from the farm. And then there's also a distributor or multiple distributors in between. So there's the farm, the processor, the distributor, maybe many distributors, and then the manufacturing brand, and then the manufacturing brand, and then the distributor, and then the retailer. And so there's all of these different steps in the chain, right? And so we talked to lots of different farmers who were growing wheat in a way that we wanted to celebrate, but it was so hard to be able to have those farmers actually produce a product, like a flour, that we could use in a consistent way in a packaged product. And so what if, and there was also risks to Moonshot the brand as well, right? So what if that one farmer that's growing your wheat has something happen, right? And how do you have a consistent product that tastes consistent, because people tend to expect a consistent product in the grocery store, right? How do you have a product that tastes consistent and that you can manufacture consistently and can provide to grocery stores consistently when you're working with one farmer? You have to have a kind of a system of farmers, right? And that those farmers need a processor, and typically processors of anything, not just wheat, but also like fruit, et cetera, they operate at really large scales. And so they're not just working with one farmer, they may be working with 100 farmers, they may be even working with 1,000 farmers. And so we had to find a miller that was able to produce flour that we were able to use in Moonshot snacks. I'm actually here. No. There we go. So these are the products that we ended up producing. We brand them as a climate-friendly cracker, and they're made with regenerative wheat. So we ended up working with Cairn Spring Mills up in Washington, and they had already had a network and ecosystem of farmers using a lot of these soil health practices. And so we ended up working with them, and we ended up finding a manufacturer that was operating within 100 miles of them that had a LEED certified building, which is very rare in manufacturing facilities. And we're able to build up this really local supply chain around that ecosystem. And so we launched Moonshot Snacks December 2020. And so that was kind of part of the saga, was how do you actually source something that's regenerative and get it into an individual product? Another part of our journey was, what exactly is a climate-friendly product? Like, what does that mean? There could be so many different meanings. Even as much as there are different meanings to regenerative agriculture, there are even more ways that you could think about something being climate friendly, because that encompasses other things like renewable energy, packaging, all of these different things. And so we were on this journey. We ended up putting a definition of regenerative agriculture right on the box and definitions of how we were climate friendly right on the box. And also on our website, but that's kind of a challenging thing, right? And Lainey mentioned right now that there is a lot of different definitions of regenerative agriculture, and you can define it any way you want. And so one of the things that retailers are doing, like Whole Foods, for example, if you have the word regenerative on your box, they want you to fill out a form to kind of substantiate why it's regenerative. And so if you're using a certification like Regenerative Organic Certified, I think that's the acronym, or Savory Institute's Ecological Outcomes Verified, that's kind of a substantiation, but they also allow substantiation outside of that. If you can provide evidence that there's proof of these soil health practices. Because some of these certifications are actually kind of challenging to achieve. And just because you're not achieving them doesn't mean you're not using regenerative practices. And so they kind of wanted to split the difference there. They want to be able to support brands that are talking about regenerative agriculture, but they don't want anybody to just be able to put the word regenerative on shelf. But it's definitely kind of a challenging and evolving space. And then, and I think it's when you go to Expo, you hear a lot of brands talking about regenerative ag. But I was talking to a friend who is in kind of the grower and commodity space, going to a commodity-oriented conference, and they don't talk about that. They might talk about climate smart agriculture, or they might talk about like land stewardship. And so there's these different conversations that are happening in different pockets that call basically a lot of similar principles, different things. So I'm gonna stop there with the story of Moonshot Snacks. I stopped working on Moonshot after we launched it in 2020 and moved over to our sister company, Planet Forward. But Moonshot, actually, we just announced last week that Moonshot Snacks was acquired by Patagonia Provisions. And so we're really excited for the team to continue that journey as well, because Patagonia Provisions is one of the big supporters of the Regenerative Organic certification and really thinking about systems change there. Okay, so as Julie and I were there creating Moonshot, we were also thinking about how hard it was to actually create a climate-friendly snack, how hard it was to identify suppliers, how hard it was to define what it is to be climate-friendly, and we were thinking about how to help other brands do the same thing. And we explored kind of helping other brands identify more regenerative suppliers, but because of all of the challenges I just mentioned around all of the different steps in the ecosystem, that proved to be something that a lot of brands weren't quite ready for. And as we talked to a lot of brands, many of them were saying, well, I'm already doing all of these great sustainable things, but I feel like they don't mean anything because there's nothing quantitative behind it. And so we really kind of listened our way into becoming a climate management platform for food and beverage companies. And what we do today is we help food and beverage companies assess their carbon emissions, and we help them identify emissions reductions. And we can do this in a couple of different ways. We help them do product life cycle assessments so they can say, this is actually the carbon footprint of our particular product. We help them do company level assessments, so that includes things like their facilities, and includes things like business travel and employee commuting, things that wouldn't necessarily be included in a product life cycle assessment. And then the really special thing about Planet Forward is we're built upon this database and model that enables brands to really understand their emissions. That includes things like the kinds of practices that are in their ingredients. And so most carbon assessments out there, especially at the high level, will start with a spend-based analysis. So the US EPA publishes economic input-output data, and so you can say, like, for X number of dollars spent in this sector, like beef, it's this many, like, CO2 equivalents. But those are very, very rough estimates, and if you continue to spend that much money in that particular sector, you'll never be able to indicate that you're reducing your emissions, even if you are purchasing something that uses regenerative practices. And so what Planet Forward does is we are able to intake specific supplier level information, including whether or not your supplier uses renewable energy, different soil health practices that your supplier uses. And so we're able to provide our customers with a more nuanced view of their emissions. And really 80% of emissions for food and beverage companies comes from their purchased materials. So the ingredients that they use to make the products is 80% of their emissions. And if they can never reduce that without reducing their spend, they really need to get into a much more nuanced point of view on where their emissions are coming from in their food. And so we help them do that. And we've been able to help some of the products we work with identify 10 to 40% potential emissions reductions when we're working on assessments with them. And this is, to bring it back to Moonshot, an example of how we were able to help Moonshot do that. So you can see we're comparing here to industry standard practices, and you can see the benefit of Moonshot's regenerative wheat, as well as some other practices they have around renewable energy and recycled packaging, resulting in lower carbon emissions for the brand. And with that, I think we will wrap up and come back with questions.
Okay, everybody. We're going to get settled again. Our panelists have collected your questions, but you're also welcome to come up to the mic, and Ryan will be our trusty facilitator, so he'll look out for you if you come up to the mic with a question. And I'll just invite everybody, if you might, put your laptops away and really kind of enjoy this portion of class. We're really lucky to have these three up here with us, and I'm confident it will be an enlightening discussion. So, Ryan, take it away.
Cool. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah? I have to say, Will is just like the consummate teacher. And somehow, every time I'm in his midst, even being invited back as a guest, he pushes me to do a little bit extra. And I'm always grateful for it, but thank you, Will, wherever you are. So I guess we'll start with some of the questions that you guys submitted during that little break. I won't start with the one for me. Okay, for all of us, for undergraduates who are just realizing their interest in regenerative ag, what advice do you have? And then there's a little note, advice on anything, career, getting experience, resources. Thank you. Lainey, do you want to start?
Sure. My really short answer to that is spend more time on farms. I feel like that was a real missing piece for me, even as a grad student. Coming back to learn about food systems after not learning about that in my undergrad time. I was researching sustainable food systems as a solution to climate change, but really had not ever spent time on a farm, grew up in the suburbs. So I sought out for myself a sustainable agriculture internship titled Sustainable Agriculture Intern on Lopez Island in Washington State my first summer after moving out to the West Coast. And that was not recommended to me by anyone. In fact, it was like maybe discouraged from my grad school advisors being like, you should do something that's going to lead to a master's project over your summer break. But I was like, no, I'm going to go intern on a farm for 3 months. And I actually did do a master's project on that farming community, so it worked out. But that is kind of my short, now becoming longer answer, is just to spend more time learning about food systems from the farm level, because so much flows up from that across all of the parts of the chain that Elaine mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I have to second that one, because I think it is really important if you are interested in food systems to understand what's happening at the farm. And then I would also say that don't be afraid to reach out to people and ask for their knowledge or experience. I mean, it's obviously helpful when you have done a little bit of research yourself, but I think there's a lot of folks out there that are willing to help, and also it can't hurt to ask even if somebody says no, because there is just so much that you can learn from people who are doing the kind of work that you want to do, and so I would definitely advise you to pursue that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say both of those. I totally agree with, to Elaine's point, one thing that has been incredible for me in my career journey is that everybody in this space seems to be so helpful. And I think it's because everybody wants a better world. And they just, if they hear that somebody wants to be a part of that, they want to help you on your journey. There's no competitiveness, and it's what makes it a really fun space to be in. And it also kind of encourages you that like this is the right way, because it just feels good to be in that space. And I think generally, maybe this is just more life advice, but anything that you find interesting, find a small way to test that and try that out immediately. I thought for many years about being a cook, and it just didn't seem like something that was okay to do. And I kind of hate that attitude now, and I hate that I had that, but it seemed like with a college education, you shouldn't really do that. And then I took this class here called Design Your Life, and they encouraged you that if you had some interest, just find a small way to test it. You don't have to commit to it. And they said, just hang out in the kitchen. I got to hang out in a pretty special kitchen, but when I was there, I was like, this is amazing. And whatever the cost, I'm going to do it for at least a little while. So that would be my answer. Okay, next one is for Elaine and Ryan. Who are the students of the Climate Farm School? Who does Climate Farm School target? I think both of us would love to answer this. I'll let you answer it, Elaine.
Yeah, well, I have been asked this a lot, and I always try to like list some types of people and jobs, but really I feel like Climate Farm School attracts such a diverse array of adult professionals because food touches all of our lives that it's really for everyone. And I don't feel like bad saying that, because we've had people from tech jobs and companies, venture capitalists, unemployed parents who want to be home gardeners with their kids, artists, teachers, dietitians, OBGYNs. So many different types of people, some aspiring farmers, some current farmers who want to adopt a stronger climate lens onto what their farming practices are. So it's been really cool to have these cohorts of usually around 10 people in each of the courses that we run, where like everyone is from a different professional background. And we've thought about offering courses geared towards specific types of professions all at once, and we may do that, but right now there's been a great diversity of people, and that's been really helpful, especially in the confines of this kind of empowering and inspiring learning environment where people feel okay to disagree, and it's not confrontational or adversarial or competitive. It's like, again, coming from this place of everyone wants to make a better world through food systems and climate. So if you think we can do that through money, and I think we can do that through politics, like let's talk about the reasons why and those differences, and not, say like you're a greedy capitalist and you're an idealistic libertarian or something. And people can disagree very wholeheartedly and yet maintain really strong relationships in these course communities that we've had, which I really like.
This one is for.
What was your answer?
For who the. Same answer. I guess to expand on it, I would just say that I feel like it's been like 50-50 in every course that I've taught of people who are in the food system in some way or gardening, and then 50% finance and tech people. Yeah, and it's just really cool to see the interaction between those people, and it's great, and it's kind of like it feels like a summer camp experience for adults, and and everybody just, part of it's being on the farm, part of it is being in community, part of it is talking to farmers, but I think part of it is just being away from your everyday life, often not having reception.
Bad internet.
Yeah, bad internet always makes it hard for the instructors a little bit, but all of that I think helps people kind of achieve what they come to achieve, which is to gain a new perspective. All right, this one's for you, Elaine. How do you calculate greenhouse gas emissions? Maybe should we get you on the chalkboard?
Is that the whole question?
No, for a CPG company with middlemen that have proprietary data, this seems very specific, and too many middlemen who are Planet Forward clients.
Oh, interesting. That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
And the short answer is there's a lot of estimation that happens. And so when you look at greenhouse gas emissions at a corporate level, there's scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are those that are controlled by the company itself. And then there's scope 3 emissions, which is everything upstream, which is their suppliers, and also everything downstream. So for a CPG company, maybe they have some of their owned and operated facilities, but actually most of their emissions are going to be in scope 3, and it is going to be from their suppliers who they don't control and they may not be able to get data from. They may actually contract out some of their manufacturing or a lot of their manufacturing, and so they may or may not be able to get data from those suppliers. And then it also includes things like business travel and commuting, and it includes things like distribution, because most CPG companies will sell their products to a distributor, and then the distributor actually is the one that sells it to the retailer. And so they might not even know how their product ends up getting to the store. And so this question was very smart, where we don't know oftentimes. And so part of what Planet Forward does is we use industry standard estimates to help our customers understand, well, what is the impact of this distribution leg given that this is the weight of your product? Or, okay, these are your 10 ingredients. Here's the emissions factors that are industry standard for these ingredients. If you are not able to get more detail from your suppliers, you can use these. If you are able to get more detail from your suppliers, we can incorporate that. And so the approach we take, and the approach that most of the industry takes, is you start with what you have, and there are definitely a lot of estimates, and then you're supposed to get better and better. And only when you get better can you actually realize your emissions reductions, because if you're using industry standard data, you can never really say that you're getting better at that particular component unless you have more specific data about your specific operation. And so there is this incentive to continue to get better data, because otherwise you can't realize emissions reductions. And almost all of the big food companies have commitments around realizing emissions reductions, because they are getting pressure from investors and from the public to reduce their emissions.
Elaine, how big is your team?
We're about 30 people.
All right, there's a part 2 of this. Well, it's a different question, but also for you. Why did Provisions acquire Moonshot?
I think, well, actually, that's a really good question. I think that we believe that Moonshot and Provisions together can accomplish a lot in terms of being able to spread this message around regenerative agriculture and around climate-friendly food. Moonshot really was able to accomplish a lot in its several years since launching, in terms of being able to get a pretty broad distribution across a number of retailers nationally with Whole Foods and with Target, and also kind of the brand building that the Moonshot team has been able to do. I don't actually know the specific reasons, but those are reasons why I think that might be the case. Yeah.
And I just want to encourage anybody to come up and ask a question if they want. We've got a few more here, but it's nice to hear directly from people what you're thinking.
We sell Moonshot crackers in the Green Valley Farm Marketplace, which is a very small local vendor in Sonoma County.
Love that.
Honor system only.
All right. Lainey and Ryan, what do you see as the biggest limitations or obstacles of making regenerative agriculture bigger? I think we can both take a stab at that. I'll take a stab first.
Yeah, go for it.
I would say one thing, this question doesn't specifically say scale, but just in case this is a question about scale, one thing that I always kind of caution against is starting with this idea that things have to scale, because scale to me is part of the problem. I think what we want to see is replication. We want to see people take these principles and apply them to their specific circumstances, their ecosystems. And so the obstacles to that, or maybe the things that we need to do to enable that, there's a bunch. A huge one is knowledge sharing. It's farmers learning from other farmers oftentimes and seeing examples. I think a major thing that I'm sure both of you would agree with is farming is a really risky business with very thin margins, and even the farmers who are interested in regenerative agriculture, of which there are more and more all the time because there's so many pressures on farmers. I mean, their input costs are going up and their soil is degrading, and so they know that they're sort of on a treadmill that's not super sustainable, but making a big switch is pretty scary because they often don't have a season of income or savings for things to go wrong in. So I think they need to see examples of other people doing it and be assured that if I do this, it's going to work. The other thing that can happen there is we can provide some sort of financial support for those farmers in transition. And then, God, there's so many I could go on. So I'll say one more thing and then I'll turn it over to you. And another thing is you heard about the Farm Bill last week, and that just kind of stacks the deck against regenerative farming. I mean, we incentivize a crazy agricultural system that I'm not convinced, in fact, I'm pretty convinced it wouldn't work if we didn't subsidize it so heavily, because you're literally degrading the very resources on which you rely to produce your product, if you want to call it that. So it shouldn't work, but we subsidize it. So if you took away those subsidies and you put those to regenerative farmers, I think that would make a big difference. But there's a lot more obstacles. I'm sure you guys have opinions.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think I actually happened to randomly speak to this woman last week who's like a big player in food systems, and now I forget where she works, but she told me that she helped create the certified transitional label to support farms a little bit more financially through a transition, I think specifically from conventional to organic, while you can't be making the extra premium on organic products as you're transitioning. So that's one thing that obviously helps on the financial side. I think politically also so much needs to change. But I think really to make regenerative agriculture a bigger part of our food system, we need to find a way to have more people involved on land and projects on the land. And so I think about what's successful about regenerative, and it's when you have soil health people and volunteers and farmers and nearby farmers and all these people coming together to support the land projects and then distribute the product off those lands to processors, consumers, chefs. And so, but there's not really a way to make money on the land currently. And so we need to really think about ways that we can support farmers to make a living, and then also the associated people around those like farming and land-based ecosystems. And basically it equates also in my mind to like more people working on the land and less of our time as people working and making money on computers, because all of that it takes to support ourselves while we're on the computer is sort of like fossil fuel and, you know, land and food intensive in the current system paradigm. So I feel like I haven't quite figured that out, but in my mind I'm like, programs like AmeriCorps that pay people to be on the land, like maybe there's like the Food Corps is one version of that, or paying farmers as we pay teachers to educate students, and not just like you don't pay a teacher per student that they educate but we pay farmers per vegetable that they grow or something. So just different financial models that support a lifestyle that is like rooted in doing more than just growing as much food as possible, because that's the only way you get paid to be on the land.
I think one thing that I would add or just kind of highlight there about what Lainey's saying is there are all these benefits to agroecologically grown food that are not, they don't show up in the vegetable. I mean, you're providing clean air and clean water. You're remediating a lot of problems. And so we need to start finding a way to compensate farmers for that. It's been proposed to consider it a public service and maybe provide them the same federal health care that federal employees get. So I think being creative and recognizing that there's a lot of value, it's not just about the yield.
Yeah.
Yeah. Elaine?
Yeah. I think thinking about the system differently is really important here. I'm in this book club that we just read and discussed a book called A History of the World in 7 Cheap Things. And part of the thrust of that book is like our history has been people moving off of the land. And what we were talking about in my book club was, have we moved too many people off the land? And is there a connection with the land that we actually need in order to be able to build these systems in a way that is regenerative, right? And just the side note here is that this book club started with us reading All We Can Save, which I highly recommend. It's a series of essays about climate change across a number of different industries. And they actually have a structured book club, like set of discussion questions that you can do over 10 weeks.
Very helpful.
But back to the original question, I think thinking about systems in a different way is part of it. And then I also think that Ryan mentioned thinking about rewarding farmers for doing this. So there is an organization called the Ecosystems Services Marketplace Consortium, ESMC, and they are working on basically creating ecosystem credits that are kind of like carbon credits, where you can pay farmers for the soil health practices they have, things they do that contribute to biodiversity, like across a number of different environmental metrics. And so that's something that does exist and is supported by a number of big players in the kind of like agri-food business. And there's a lot of good things about that. And also, one of the challenges I see with that is it kind of further commodifies the things that the ecosystem benefits and separates them from the food, for example, that's being grown. Or a lot of the agriculture in the U.S. is not, I think only 30% of U.S. ag goes to food. Most of it goes to fuel or feed. And so it kind of further separates the food and the benefits. And so there's benefits to that kind of approach, and then there's also like potential challenges.
Yeah, it's like if we paid a lot of money for ecosystem services, all of a sudden you wouldn't have anyone growing food. They would just be planting trees and benefiting the ecosystem. And so yeah, you can't, like, monetizing it is not the only part of the solution.
And I was talking to somebody about during the break here about how one of the benefits of regenerative agriculture is potentially nutrient density of food. And so if you separate out the growing of it from the practices, how does the consumer really understand like the whole arc and make choices that actually influence the way food companies do things? The last thing I'll say about this question is I really believe that processors or intermediaries need to exist. So if a farmer wants to transition, they need to have somebody in their local area that they can sell to, that will take this diverse set of crops that they're growing and actually take it to market, because it doesn't make sense for every single farmer to take all of their product to market. And so there is kind of this movement around local millers and local grain ecosystems. So Karen Spring Mills that I mentioned is one. In Washington State, there's
Community Grains here?
Community Grains here. There's in Wisconsin, and I want to say it's Meadowlark Organics, but that might be the name of the farm that's associated with the mill. But basically, they have a mill that is supplying freshly milled, diverse sets of grains to the Chicago area. And so those are the kinds of things that I think really, like, if we are talking about scaling just a little bit, like local processing ecosystems are actually really, really important for enabling farmers to actually get their product to market.
Totally.
This is a great question and sort of a dangerous one, because I think the three of us could have a long conversation about it. But your answer, Elaine, also just makes me think of the importance of trust in this whole thing. I mean, we try to use certifications to drive change, but at the end of the day, there's always an element of trust somewhere along the way, because it's really hard. We talked a bit about tonight how the different definitions of regenerative agriculture are sort of up for debate, and it's just really hard to know when somebody's doing the right thing. But when you're on the land, it's actually like fairly obvious. So I do think having these local processors that are a little bit closer to it makes a lot of sense. So more local food ecosystems seems to be part of it too. Anyway, thank you for that question. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Is this awesome? Hi, I'm Alex. I want to say I'm really enjoying your guys' talk, and I'm also really interested in regenerative agriculture, and I think that your guys' conversation just before this ties into my question. My home county in Southern California has a lot of agriculture. It's very monoculture. So this class has inspired me to go back home during summer and sort of talk to some of the farmers. So I was wondering if you have any recommendations on switching or encouraging and facilitating the transition from a monoculture farm to something that is more regenerative, because that's something like an actual thing I want to do and help my community with. So would love to hear that.
Thanks, Alex. And what county is it?
Ventura County.
Ventura?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
cool.
a lot of agriculture from Oxnard and places like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, cool.
I know that there is a, I'm blanking on the name, the Rodale Institute has a,
Oh yeah.
they have an experimental farm there, which is pretty cool. And I think they took over land from Driscoll's, which is, well, probably about their monoculture, but sometimes organic strawberries. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think one place to start is just to ask farmers about the challenges that they've been experiencing, what makes life like really hard for them, or even like, how have you done recently in like the crazy waters this winter or the crazy rains, and having farmers kind of identify areas that they've been experiencing a lot of challenge around, and then coming from a place of like not like answering all their questions or solving all their problems, but like expressing a lot of empathy, having the ability to say like, oh, well, like, would it help if you had cover crops or crop diversity, or like if all of your almond trees were drowned, is it possible to also grow avocados here? Like coming, I guess, from a brainstorming, like, where are your challenges and how can we work together to solve them place, and not like, as I have been accused in the past of like this academic, like I have the answer to all of your problems, which was something I had to be very aware of when I was first a farming intern on Lopez, and I had, taken 2 semesters of grad school and was meeting all these farmers and being in a farming community for the first time. But I think it's especially can be a challenge to encounter monoculture, conventional growing operations, and try to encourage a shift. And you might also be able to like relatively quickly sniff out like, okay, this is someone who's never going to change versus this is someone who has some openness, and kind of like lean in there, because I've honestly come to the opinion that you don't have time to waste on people that are never going to change, and they're hopefully old anyway. So don't worry about them.
I think I'm a little bit further from the farm, and so I feel like I don't have as much to say there. But one thing I would think about is farms in that area that are already doing that, and kind of talking to them and learning from what they're doing, because that's I think the way to do it is that somebody is actually able to do it successfully in a similar geography.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'll add to that, I mean, I think it's a really important point. If you can find ways that have already been successful, and a big part of that is also showing that there's a market for it. So if there's somebody that's already selling to a market in that area, say, hey, if you grow X, Y, Z, I already know that you can sell it. That's a really helpful thing. Another way to think about it too is, I don't know that you're going to go change Driscoll's or something. It often happens in land transition. Mm-hmm. But if there is perchance somebody that is curious about this, there's ways to break up a monoculture which doesn't involve another crop. I mean, you can introduce a cover crop or a hedgerow or something like that, and they don't have to change the rest of their supply chain. So I think that's kind of an interesting way to do it. And then one thing that I wish was easier to do is finding ways to integrate animals, because that's something you can keep growing whatever you're doing. You can add fertility to your land. There gets to be a complication around sort of public health regulations. However, if there's a gap, I think it has to be 120 days between when the animals are on the land. That's another easy way to do it. So some of these lower hanging fruit, which don't involve a new expertise for the farmer, could be a good way to do it.
Totally.
Thank you for that.
And I don't mean to be stereotypical. I also know some really amazing old farmers who have adopted new practices very quickly, including the farmers I learned from. They were like in their mid-80s and they're still changing. But the old white farmer stereotype is also in my head.
I mean, I think there is a point there that I agree with that. And people that have been doing something for their whole career, it's a lot. It's a lot to ask. And oftentimes it's in the land transition that change really happens.
Yeah, totally.
All right, another question for Elaine. What does the Moonshot Patagonia Provisions merger or sale of Moonshot to Patagonia mean for the brand? Could it spark other activity similar to this in the industry?
Oh. I think it means we're excited about Moonshot being able to work with Patagonia to really kind of spread its impact further. I don't know that it would necessarily spark similar acquisition activity. I think this was something that just happened. It wasn't necessarily something that either Moonshot or Patagonia was specifically looking for or targeting. Yeah.
Did you have a question? Yeah, cool.
First off, thanks for being with us. Kind of thinking back on some of the environmental damages that conventional farming does and some of the benefits that either regenerative or maybe traditional practices that have been used prior, what is the time frame, thinking of like those who are enacting policy or making decisions regarding farming are often these big farming operations that are a conventional system. What kind of timeline, and I know that's like kind of just a hard question that they're out there, but like, what do you think that looks like going forward in the future?
Sorry, so are you talking about policymakers?
Kinda, yeah. So switching from a more conventional way of farming and seeing that as the right way to incentivize more regenerative farm or maybe traditional farming operations.
Sure. Thank you. What was your name?
David.
David, thanks, David. I'll make one comment here. I think one thing is that the Farm Bill is coming up this year, which I'm sure you've heard about. So there's massive opportunity for change anytime that happens. And sometimes those changes can be really actually dramatic. It seems like this huge kind of monolith piece of legislation, but my understanding is in the past it's been really close to like subsidies being cut off. It hasn't quite happened yet, but so you can see changes like that happen quickly just because of the 5-year cycle of the Farm Bill. But I do think it's important that when that happens, we have to have a transition period of sort of weaning farmers off for supporting them. So I think one thing that needs to be understood by policymakers is actually like what happens on the land when you make changes. I'm sure you've all heard this. Well, we saw this op-ed about, was it in Sri Lanka, where they just outlawed fertilizers, and there was a huge crash in yields, and it was a total disaster, and it's being used widely to sort of, I don't know, admonish or warn against organic agriculture. But the problem is not organic agriculture. The problem is that you can't just take a system off of something it's been reliant on for so long. So I don't know, I guess my answer to that is ecologists need to be, and farmers need to be talking to policymakers.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know how long it would take to realize a full shift in even an ideal sense from like conventional to regenerative organic agriculture if we were to like pass a rad farm bill this year. I want to say like 5 years or less if we were really taking it seriously. But yeah, that's a really good question. I've been thinking about it a little bit ideally in my head, and I think a lot of what you said is really important and true, to ground it in ecology, demonstrations of what's actually working on the land, how to transition, not just in like the, I'm going to go organic and now 3 years later I can be, but yeah, how to transition what we're growing as well, because not all that we're currently growing makes sense to grow organically if so much of it is animal feed and fuel right now. Like, who cares if we're growing organic ethanol for putting in people's cars? So it would also be changing what to grow, and that takes a lot of time and knowledge shift to be growing more things differently. And we'd have to have some sort of agricultural training program for large numbers of people to be studying and doing that work eventually.
Yeah, I think it brings up a good point about just like input substitution sort of thing. There's a whole, like Elaine was talking about, there's a whole system that needs to change. If we're growing all organic, regenerative food, that food is probably different than what we're eating now.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious your thoughts, Elaine, because that involves the rest of the supply chain sort of shifting too.
Yeah.
More than 5 years.
Well, if you think definitely more than 5 years. If you think about what it takes for an individual farmer to change, right? They probably aren't going to shift their entire farm to these practices immediately. They might take a portion of their acreage, like maybe 5%, and just like try it. And then they have to try it actually for several years to be convinced that it works before they like put more of their farm in, and they still might not put more of their farm in, right? So if you think about the timeline for an individual farmer even to transition, like it has to be at least 5 years and probably closer to 10.
Yeah.
And then if you think about in history, like less than 1% of U.S. farmland is organic agriculture, but the like USDA organic like program was created, I think, in 1990, and organic was a movement far before then. And so, you know, that's taken like 30, 40 years to get to 1%. I would hope and think that that would be faster with regenerative because everything is happening faster these days, but that's kind of a historical benchmark to think about. And then you asked me a specific question.
Well, I was just thinking about if we were to change the way that we grow food, probably means that what's coming off of the farms is going to be different, more diversification, and so then there's a whole ecosystem of processors and processed food, packaged food producers that need to shift to.
Yeah, and actually I think a big point here is that so much of the agriculture in the US is not actually related to food, and so if you really want to think about making systemic shifts in agriculture in the US, you actually have to think about where the fuel and feed commodity streams are going and like what the incentives are for those kinds of growers as well, because that's a really large proportion of our farmland. And so there are folks like Farmers Business Network has a program where they're basically paying farmers for reducing their climate impacts. And like a lot of that is just like reducing the nitrogen they use on the land. It's not like full regenerative, but it is kind of moving in that direction. And they are working with like big agribusiness who are the buyers for these farmers to incentivize those kinds of practices because those businesses are getting pressure to reduce their emissions. So one of the things we didn't talk about as much, but is something that people are excited about with regenerative agriculture is the ability to sequester carbon in the soil and actually draw down carbon from the atmosphere. And so I do think there's still some excitement around that, and that can be a driver for folks doing this more quickly if the buyers at the end of the chain really have a lot of reason to need to reduce their emissions quickly.
Yeah, and then one thing that your answer makes me think for David is that you asked about time, but also specifically, I'm thinking about how these policies should function. I feel like it should be more carrots and less sticks, like outlawing things or saying you can't do something anymore is really hard for these big systems that need to shift. But having more incentives, whether it be for more carbon on farms, makes a lot of sense that people have a reward for implementing these new practices. Thank you for that question. All right, another one from the break for Elaine about Moonshot. Who are Moonshot's competitors? In what ways did you market your products with competitors in mind?
Oh, I apologize. I'm not a good person to talk about Moonshot's marketing because I was never the marketing lead for the company, and I also haven't been directly involved for several years now. But I would say that kind of competitors include just like all cracker brands that are on the shelf, right? And I think the way we specifically focused Moonshot marketing was on climate-friendly messaging, but also deliciousness, because deliciousness is always going to be the most important thing, more so than any other messaging you have. Like if it doesn't taste good, they're not going to buy it again, and the most important thing in a product is that people are going to buy it again. And so we really, in developing the product, did a lot of taste testing. I've personally taste tested all the prototypes to make sure that it was something that really would be delicious. And also, one of the reasons why we believe the product is delicious is actually because it was grown with these practices. And we really think you can taste the wheat in the product, and it is more expensive, and that's kind of why Moonshot is more expensive. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. I think the point that it has to be delicious, and it usually is more delicious when it's done the right way, and that all of this is pretty fun when you get to it, is a great place. Well, thank you guys, and thanks for letting me ask you questions. And thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.